Well, some of you may have seen me here talking about the dam before. I was honored to be the Historical Society's speaker at their annual dinner almost 3 years ago now. But since I was I offered or was invited, I don't remember exactly who initiated it, but since I was coming back, I wanted to expand a little bit of the history and go just a little farther back in time, and I'm glad I did, and I'll tell you why. The quote from A River Runs Through It is purely decoration, but it's one of my favorite endings to a book ever. I thought it was beautiful. I'll let you read that. Some of you might know Paul Pluswick. He contributed several of the modern photos of the dam, although it's very photogenic, as I'm sure you all know, which is why I'm going to start with this very first slide. This is not the Pike River Dam. This is, as you can kind of see on the top of the screen, up at Winton, where there is now an active hydroelectric power plant. But some of you, well, I'm making a judgment here, but some of you might not know the song Waterfalls from the mid-90s. Maybe you do. It says, "Don't go chasing waterfalls." Okay, maybe there's some recognition. But I was wondering scientifically if there's a reason why people are attracted to waterfalls, why we like fountains. And what I was able to find, the accuracy of this is up to you if you want to do your own research, is that negative ions that are discharged by the falling water can increase blood flow to the brain, decrease stress, lower blood pressure, increase serotonin, and the visuals and the noise can stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to promote relaxation. So somebody with an actual background in science or medicine could maybe speak more to that. But if nothing else, waterfalls are just pretty. And I'm sure all of you have driven by the dam countless times. I certainly have. And that's what prompted me for the Earth Day edition of Hometown Focus in 2022 to look more into the history of the hydroelectric plant, which didn't last very long, but was really a good example of people in a community coming together to solve a problem in a way that could have worked long-term under different circumstances. But like I said, I wanted to go back a little bit farther for this presentation. And I went down a few research rabbit holes, as I often do, which distracted me a little bit from remembering exactly what the details were about the hydroelectric plant itself. So the Bois Forte Cultural Heritage Center provided me with what the Ojibwe call the Pike River. It was used as a navigation route for the Ojibwe, originally for French fur traders, and then European settlers who came north prospecting for gold and then iron ore. George Stuntz, the namesake of Stuntz Bay and the former Stuntz Township near Hibbing, was one of the earliest European settlers to survey this area and to explore the region during the gold prospecting days. And he believed that there were large stone dams that were built by the Ojibwe to aid navigation, to raise the water level in many places along the route of the Pike River so that portages would be avoided. And by his estimation, in one of his recollections, some of these boulders that were used to create these dams were several tons, weighed several tons. Something I wanted to address, which I could talk a lot more about at length, is the name of the river. So there are two references in 1823 and 1852 to the Pike River being called the Vermilion River. Later on, it was also called the Lower Vermilion River or the South Vermilion River. In one instance, I did see the name called Pickerel River. But at any rate, the English name, as we call the river and the bay today, didn't come around until at least the 1890s, if not the 1880s. And at the mouth of the river were Ojibwe villages and trading posts, and the exact location from my research was a little bit difficult to determine, but camps that were used by gold prospectors. So the river has a very long history spanning thousands of years, and the use of dams on the river is not new by any means. So this is my little joke, something icky. Ichthyology is the study of fish. This is a slightly rhetorical question. What is the fish on top? Shout it out. What's the fish? What kind of pike? A northern pike, a northern. And what's the one on the bottom? It's a walleye. If we were sitting in this room 100 years ago, or even 60, 70 years ago, many of you would likely have only referred to the top fish as a pickerel and the bottom fish as a wall-eyed pike. In Canada, for some reason, they call walleye pickerel in some parts of Canada, not everywhere. So I suspect that the English name of the Pike River and Pike Bay was not because of northern pike, but of walleye. It wasn't until the 1980s that the Department of Natural Resources fishing regulations booklets completely dropped the parenthetical pickerel next to northern pike. Wall-eyed pike stayed in use until the 1950s and 60s, at least in publications. You know, whether that was what the average fisher person called these fish is hard to determine, but the very first report of the State Fish Commission called pickerel a nuisance fish. The fish commissioner said every pickerel in the state simply occupies the room of a better fish. They were considered unwanted and should even be outlawed. I'm not making that up. The Fish Commission was reporting to the state legislature on what types of fish should be stocked to generate commerce and food for people. And of course, yeah, we all know about the Y bones, but they taste pretty good. So do walleye, of course, but northern pike were the last fish on anybody's minds, at least in the 1800s. So I wanted to address that a little bit because that explains why today in English we call the river what we do. A new El Dorado is what people called the area immediately surrounding what we now call the Pike River. The details are a little difficult to research because much of the newspaper reporting was coming especially to the Twin Cities before there was really a large newspaper presence in Duluth. But in the mid to late 1860s, there were prospectors who traveled sometimes by foot, but often up the St. Louis River and eventually to the Pike River looking for gold. And in 1865, a newspaper article from the Twin Cities, from the St. Paul Press, called the Vermilion Falls a prize above all estimable computation. So they were really capitalizing on the power of, as you'll see, the Vermilion Falls, which very much referred to what we now call the Pike River Falls. This was not the Vermilion Falls on the north end of the lake. And the Vermilion Falls Gold Mining Company was incorporated and sold stock, and people thought that this area was going to become a huge city. There were varying names for the city that was supposed to have been formed near the present-day Y store. In some places, it was referred to as Vermilion City. The historical marker that's near the Y store says Winston City. Evanston is another name that I came across, but again, this may have been something that was lost in translation. But there was at least one stamp mill built at the falls that was hauled up from St. Paul, and another one on Trout Lake. And again, George Stuntz was one of the leaders of this movement, at least in terms of surveying the area, traveling, and he was also the one who helped build the Vermilion Trail, which started essentially where the Fittger's Brewery is in Duluth. Originally, there was state funding to improve this road, and then at the federal level, Congress gave $10,000 to build a 12-foot wide road that helped people come north, both for gold mining, but also to bring annuities to the Ojibwe who were living on the Lake Vermilion Reservation. Also of note, which again I know has nothing to do with the hydroelectric plant, but shows the long-lasting impacts of the falls. There was a man named Captain Place, as in this place, who died on the trek north to Lake Vermilion, and his fellow travelers put his body up on a platform. This was wintertime, but they put his body up on a platform so that they could recover it on their way south, because they didn't want scavengers, they didn't want animals to interfere. And there were at least 2 other prospectors who were blinded in blasts. Fortunately, from what I could find, there were no human fatalities at the Pike River Dam, except for one unlucky beaver that got caught in the sluiceway in 1917. But the Pike River Falls itself, from what I can tell, resulted in no injuries. I was incredibly lucky to stumble upon this, which is the only photograph that I could find showing the falls before the construction of any dam. This came from an 1899 book called The Geology of Minnesota. And this is another newspaper account from 1865 saying, "When within half a mile of the lake, we came to a splendid fall of about 16 feet, offering a water power of great value, and one that will no doubt soon be used for crushing the rich gold quartz dug from the shores of the lake in this vicinity." And especially amusing was that this particular newspaper correspondent, who signed his name Oro Fino, meaning fine gold in Spanish, referring to the California gold rush, he would send letters back and forth from the Vermilion Range, estimated that Vermilion City would have 10,000 people because of this gold rush in the 1860s. This photo shows the Pike River. This is from the Iron Range Research Center. It's identified as the Pike River, but to me, this does not seem like the falls that we know of. But we do know that the Tower Lumber Company, one of many lumber companies that operated logging operations and sawmills in and around Tower, did build a dam on the river in the year 1900 to aid the transportation of logs coming down the river to the lake. I already mentioned George Stuntz's improved Vermilion Trail. And the city of Tower was incorporated in 1884, the same year the Soudan mine sent its first shipment of iron ore to 2 harbors by rail. And newspaper reporting at the time said that the land surrounding the river held 400 million feet of Norway and white pine. A very comprehensive history of Duluth and St. Louis County, written in 1922 by Walter Van Brunt, said that almost all of the equipment used in the very early iron ore mining was salvaged from what the gold miners had left over, including the stamp mill at the Pike River Falls and the pickaxes that they had just abandoned because there really wasn't gold in them thar hills, as they would have said. So getting more into why there was a hydroelectric plant in the first place. In 1890, the first steam-powered light plant was built on the west side of town. It would be on the left as you're heading out towards Hoodoo Point. And this helped power the Tower-Soudan Street Railway Company, which helped bring miners to and from Tower and Soudan. This was another very short-lived experiment. But those are the tracks that you can see on the left side of the power plant there. This article from the 1890s says, "The city needs an electric light plant, and it needs it bad. It would pay. The Minnesota Iron Company, operating the Soudan mine, is putting in some additions to its plant. Why not make a move to hitch on?" So in 1891, the city hired a contractor to operate the plant and supply power to the city, and they paid $10.50 per month per light. And this was referring mainly to arc lamps that would have been hung above the intersections on the main street. The second plant was built not too far from where we are now, across the river from the old brewery. And there were several early light plant superintendents, W.G. Williams, George Rivers, and William E. Fay, who was later the superintendent at the hydroelectric plant. Interestingly, there was another William E. Fay who lived in Tower, but was born in the 1890s and was later the postmaster at Chisholm. A biographical file at the University of Minnesota Duluth Library has several articles about this William E. Fay, all of them after his time as electric light plant superintendent. But then there's one about a different William E. Fay. It was a little confusing until I realized they were completely different people who happened to have the same name. Some of the farmers in the area were a little irked at the city of Tower when they switched from burning wood to burning coal, which was cheaper for the city. But the farmers who had plenty of cordwood on their properties after clearing the fields were wondering why the city wasn't supporting their local people. So before 1912, this is where the city of Tower got its electricity for the homes and businesses that had electricity. A note about William E. Fay is that this Walter Van Brunt's book that I mentioned, which is an incredible 3-volume history of Duluth and St. Louis County, says, as a boy he took up steam engineering and later completed a course in the International Correspondence School at Scranton and in electricity, and has been a proficient member of the electrical trades for many years. He left his job as the electric plant superintendent when he was elected county commissioner in 1922, and he was also one of the owners of the Vermilion Boat and Outing Company, which owned the Idlewild Resort on Isle of Pines and operated several excursion boats on the lake. So now I'm getting to what you maybe came to listen to. Why a hydroelectric plant? So in March 1911, this was an editorial that was published in the Tower Weekly News calling the existing plant, which was not that old, debilitated, expensive, and threatening the city with total darkness. They were ready to condemn the current power plant, and they were seeking a different solution. And people already knew about the power that could be generated or utilized from the Pike River Falls. And so the city council, others in the community, were looking into how that water power could effectively be used to help power the city as a replacement to this electric plant. What's interesting about the research that I was able to do about the dam and the electric plant is that only one article from over 30 years after the dam, the plant shut down, said that people were skeptical of this idea. The Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range Railroad published a magazine called the Mesabi Iron Ranger that in the 1950s did a profile on pretty much all the major communities that the railroad served. And they would talk about the community's history and what was going on in that town at the time, especially related to the railroad, but also in terms of civic organizations and elected officials and important businesses. And a historical account that had no attribution, there was no author mentioned, said that Mayor Charles Rowland, who was elected in 1911, conceived the idea of building a hydroelectric plant at Pike River. The citizens generally objected to this because it was feared that the river did not have sufficient water supply. This may have been one person remembering perhaps his circle of friends being skeptical, but the citizens were overwhelmingly in support of building the hydroelectric plant. One editorial used the slogan, "Water Power for Tower." So it was embraced as a civic project that would replace this unreliable coal-fired steam plant. And this editorial, the same one from 1911, really doesn't seem that different from what you might read today, at least in terms of tone, talking about conserving natural resources, but also using them wisely. They were the editorial was much longer, and although the article didn't mention President Theodore Roosevelt specifically, I imagine that's who the author had in mind when presumably he was writing about conservation of natural resources and land. So this writer said that the saving in fuel consumption alone, we have learned, will amount to several $1,000s each year. We must recognize the fact that the new plant is not a luxury but a necessity. And that would be any power plant. The old one had to go somehow. It either had to be completely rebuilt, retrofitted, or replaced entirely, which is what happened. Mayor Charles Rowland did champion the cause, in addition to installing cement sidewalks on Main Street, which would have been wooden prior to this. So he wasn't the organizer behind the project, but the 1954 article was accurate in that he did support the idea. So the citizens of Tower approved bonds for this project in March 1911, 117 to 13, which means there weren't a lot of people who came out to vote because there were far more people living in Tower at the time. But obviously the citizens approved of it. They were advertising bids for the construction, and the city hired a consulting engineer to study the dam, or to study the river, to make sure that the dam truly would be effective. And this engineer, Reed, reported a solid rock riverbed with banks rising up to 40 feet, a drainage basin of nearly 180 square miles, a water supply that importantly could generate 78% more than the existing plant. And if the dam were built higher than original specifications, output could be increased by 30%. So the citizens had to approve additional bonds because the costs to complete the project were higher than the originally approved amount. But if they had been willing to pay a little bit more to build the dam higher, I don't want to say it may still be generating electricity today, but it may have lasted quite a bit longer. So later in 1911, voters approved additional bonding. The H.L. Bartlett Company built the dam in the powerhouse and installed the machinery, and Walston and Sons hauled the gravel and cement and built an access road from what would now be Highway 1 to the upstream side of the falls. It was unclear what the wooden structure on the right side of this picture was, but in the middle you can see the powerhouse and a timber sluiceway to help send logs downstream. And I'm speculating, based on the presence of lumber here and the lack of water flowing over the dam, that this was perhaps before electricity was turned on, while the dam was still under construction. So there were 40 men working at the site daily on the dam, the powerhouse, and building a 6-mile transmission line from the dam coming into Tower. So on April 6, 1912, electricity started flowing, the water went through the dam, and was generating 217.8 horsepower, which was really the only term that was used in reference to the electricity generated. Megawatts, which is what you see today, simply wasn't a term that they used. And it cost the city $110 per month. There was a flow rate of 96 feet per second, and the lights were bright and clear at all times. The plant was generating enough power for nearly double of the current that had been previously used. When the city was using coal, it cost them $2,000 a year annually to run the former steam plant, and $3,000 a year when they were burning wood. In the year 1900, the Tower Weekly News published these diagrams, which show a dam and hydroelectric plant that would be similar to what was used at Pike River. The first hydroelectric plant in the United States was built on the Fox River in Appleton, Wisconsin in 1882. 4 years after the world's first modern hydroelectric plant was built in England. I am not an electrician and am not qualified to speak on the exact operations of a hydroelectric power plant, but it works essentially the same way that the steam plant did, except the source of the power. So the gravity from the river would send water through a penstock, which is the term I came across most often, or a flume. It would spin the turbine propellers, and that would generate electricity from the dynamos, which we would now call a generator. And essentially, the water took the place of what the steam would have done at a steam plant in Tower or in any other municipal electric light plant. So although this is not the electric plant at Pike River, this is a very small, municipally owned plant that was written about at length in an article in the Tower Weekly News 12 years before the Pike River plant was built. So William Fay is the man second from the right. Again, he was the superintendent of the city plant that was in town here. And a residence was built for him that was just on the south side of the river. And apparently, after the hydroelectric plant shut down, the house was moved into town. Where, I don't know. So the house may still exist somewhere. But after the dam stopped being used for electricity, the newspapers, at least in Tower, really didn't talk about it at all. Once Minnesota Power and Light started furnishing Tower with electricity, that really isn't a spoiler because there's no powerhouse there anymore, then that was it. People didn't really talk about it anymore. They moved on with their lives. So there was a house right next to the river. Here's a view upstream where you can see this little cottage again. So here's a little bit of what was going on in Tower while the dam was operating. There were many vacant buildings noted on Sanborn fire insurance maps, which is where you saw the maps of the earlier power plants. But until Prohibition, of course, there were many saloons, but confectionaries, drugstores, hotels, clothing stores, several grocery stores, not just one, feed stores, livery stables, a movie theater showing silent movies, of course, a population of about 1,000. This was amusing. This, again, has nothing to do with the hydroelectric plant, but this gives you an idea of what Tower was like when it was operating. A Tower Weekly News article from 1916 said, "Our vote is for the cow, but kept in the proper place. Old Bossy has been and is a friend to us all, but we draw the line on living with her. There is a growing sentiment in Tower against the running at large of all cattle." So there were cows that people had in town that were left to run wild throughout the city, and they were causing issues, especially on the main street, getting in people's way, as you can imagine a cow would do. The new brick high school opened in 1917, and in 1918, the Women's Civic Improvement Club purchased 10 light poles at a cost of $99 each for the main street, which would have likely replaced arc lamps like this fancy Westinghouse lamp up here that would have been suspended above the intersections. So of course the hydroelectric plant eventually shut down because what do you notice the river and the lake tending to do throughout the year and from year to year? It doesn't stay the same, does it? You can see it on the rocks. The water level is here, then it's down. And if you were to make a diagram of the water level at the falls from 1912 to 1924, it would look like a seismograph for an earthquake. It really was very much up, down, up, down. So the water power was very efficient. It was a very reliable source of electricity for the city when the water was high enough. But when the winters were cold, as we know in Tower they can get, sometimes the water would simply freeze too much, the ice would be too deep, or seasonal droughts would lead to low water levels, and the city would have to supplement electricity generation with the old power plant, or people would have to resort to using kerosene lamps in their own homes. there was a farmer named Herman Johnson who lived not too far from the plant, who sued the city for damages relating to water backing up onto his property. And the city at one point did purchase land that was adjacent to the river to avoid some of these issues, so that you wouldn't have landowners with their property getting flooded all the time. And this farmer Johnson did receive a small settlement. In 1918, a frustrated writer to the Tower Weekly News said, this is a quote, I love this, "Say, for the love of Mike, let's have a little light on the streets. One has to carry a flashlight to the post office." The water levels varied unpredictably. He said, this writer said, "A stranger getting off the night train can't find his way uptown without a guide," and that's a fact. Later on, when the bright moonlight nights come, the lights would not be needed, but under conditions existing for 2 weeks or more, they are an actual necessity. So he said, "Come on, Mr. Mayor and Councilman, give us the street lights," to, this is what the newspaper said, H-L, which I imagine was quite risque for a newspaper in 1918 to be printing, H-L, to H-L with the few extra dollars they will cost, essentially saying, pay a little bit more money, use the old light plant, and keep the lights on at night. So an 18 to 24 inch increase in the height of the dam itself was proposed, but perhaps because people were concerned that still wasn't going to be enough, the water levels were never raised. The turbines did operate at peak at 80% efficiency, and there were people in town who were pushing citizens to replace their old carbon bulbs with tungsten, which would help improve the efficiency. But then we have these other fun electrical appliances. This is the 1924 Sears Roebuck catalog, advertising electric light fixtures, electric toasters and irons and coffee pots and light bulbs, which were becoming increasingly popular. More people had electricity in their homes and were using more and more electricity. 1920 was the first full year that the dam, the power plant at the dam could generate electricity all winter long. And the dam didn't achieve 365 days of electric generation until 4 years after the plant was built. In 1925, the United States generated 35% of its electricity from power plants at dams, and 57% from coal. But as you can see from this statistic here, in 1910, about 14% of American homes, rural and urban, had electricity. By 1930, that was 70%. So there were more and more homes with electricity, and the power plant at the dam simply couldn't keep up. It was seen as obsolete and costly. And as the citizens of Tower were becoming increasingly frustrated with this inadequate and inconsistent supply of electricity, the Minnesota Power and Light Company, MP&L Minnesota Power, was increasing their supply of hydroelectric plants. They were building plants at Little Falls, up in Winton, which was being built starting in 1923 and opened in 1924. And that plant is still in use. It's among their smallest, but that is a structure that is now 100 years old with machinery that has been upgraded over time. And you can see on the St. Louis River near Carlton, the Thompson Hydroelectric plant is a much larger operation. So cities at this time were getting away from hydroelectricity. Of course, cities were still operating their own electric light plants, but hydroelectric power was becoming increasingly less common for a city to operate, especially a city of Tower's size that was so far removed from the power source. So in 1924, the voters of Tower approved a franchise with MP&L by a very large margin, not so far off from the vote to approve bonds to build the dam in the first place, to allow MP&L to come in and install their infrastructure for lighting. Another editorial to the Tower Weekly News said in 1924, all the city could hope to realize would be what the machinery would bring as scrap. So that was the fate of the power plant. So from 1912 to 1924, again, the plant did generate electricity. It was quite successful when the water was high enough. Whether or not raising the dam truly would have been enough to keep the plant sustainable for decades, if not a century more, is really hard to say. The only reliable sources that we have that I've seen are from a weekly newspaper in a small town with lots of other things going on. And all we get are editorials or unattributed articles talking about the reliability. What I found interesting is that in 1979, the Army Corps of Engineers did a study across the entire country of rivers where hydroelectric power could possibly be generated. There was a relatively minor energy crisis in the late 70s. That was a joke. It was a pretty big energy crisis in the late 70s, and so the Army Corps of Engineers was doing this huge study all across the country of ways that the country could generate alternative forms of power to keep costs down, to keep electricity more reliable. And so they were looking at hydroelectric power, which is an old and very reliable form of electricity when you have the right river and you have the right infrastructure that's built. And they did include the Pike River Dam in their study simply because they were studying any existing dam, whether that was used in 1979 for hydroelectric power or for recreation, as it was noted in this Army Corps of Engineers study, presumably because of the boating and fishing that was done upstream of the dam. But ownership was transferred to the state in 1974, and the state dam engineer, Jason Boyle of the Department of Natural Resources, notes that the Pike River Dam is unusual for a state-owned dam because most of them were built in the 1930s. Most of those were built during the New Deal for hydroelectricity, for reservoirs for a water supply, or some of them are at the outlets of a lake. So it's an outlier. There was a repair project in 2021 that sealed a submerged outlet and solidified the old timber sluiceway on the top of the dam. If I can get my mouse to cooperate here, I can tell you more. There we go. I lost some of my notes. But the dam is on the state's list of dams to repair. It certainly isn't in any danger of imminent collapse, but many of the structural repairs that they're looking at doing would cost about $2 to $4 million. And this information hasn't changed since I first wrote about the dam in 2022. And I did ask him if there's a reason why the dam wouldn't be removed completely. And at this point, because there are property owners upstream of the dam who have riverfront property, essentially, they have direct access to the river, removing the dam would return the river to its original state, more or less. And the property owners might not be very happy about that. So the dam is for being well over 100 years old, is in very good shape, but like any structure, needs regular maintenance. The photo on the right, of course, is not a contemporary photo from summer, but I did want to show a little comparison. The structure itself really hasn't changed that much, except for the powerhouse that was in the middle, which is now being reclaimed by trees. You can see, it may be a little hard to see from where you are, some of the logs that were upstream of the dam that made their way down this sluiceway into the river. So it's considered a low hazard structure. It simply requires regular maintenance and, when state funds are available, a larger repair. So the reason that I wanted to talk about this at all and research the project was because it was an unusual example of a very small city comparatively using a resource that was available in a way that was innovative. The people of Tower took a pretty big chance, especially considering that the power plant really didn't work long term. But it showed both the promise and the limits of early infrastructure. But as I said, for 12 years, this was an efficient but simply unreliable method of generating electricity. So again, I've driven by the Pike River Dam probably hundreds of times since I was a little fellow, visiting my grandpa who lived on Pike Bay. And I think there's something about that spot, this almost ancient-looking structure that's alluring to us, and it's very easy to get transfixed, hopefully not while you're driving, by the falls, by the dam. It's always an indicator of what the weather has been like in a given year. Is there water flowing over the spillway or not? My parents' wedding picture was taken right by the falls on the north side of the river. So it holds a special place in my heart, as well as for many of you, I'm sure. So I've tried to give a brief glimpse into the history of not only the hydroelectric plant, but of the river itself. So perhaps when you leave today, or when you have a moment and you're driving down Highway 77, you can stop for a picnic, stop and look at the falls, and let the current take you back in time. Thank you.